Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This episode of CTO Confessions is brought to you by the one and only IT Labs. And your host today is me, TC Gill, IT Labs Chief Talking Officer, and I'm speaking from London, UK. So, Skyler, welcome to CTO Confessions. It's great to have you on board, sir.
Thank you so much for the invite, TC. It's awesome to be here.
Great. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And who do you work for?
Yeah, I'm Skyler Nesheim. I am the CTO at Dwolla. I've been in the business for the last decade or so, and my responsibilities at Dwolla revolve around software engineering and product management, product leadership, as well as pretty much everything technology-wise rolls through me in the business.
Brilliant. I love it. So what is the problem that Dwolla are solving in the market? What's the thing that they're doing?
Dwolla is a fintech company, and we are focused in the area of payments. Payments is a very broad space, and there's lots of different kinds of styles of payments, and there's lots of different payment technology. We are specifically focused on an area of payments that we call account-to-account payments. So we focus on delivering a payment gateway to our clients that allows them to embed our software as part of their application.
You kind of mentioned that there's lots of different types of payments, right? Because I'm not in that field, and I guess there's a lot of people in the audience as well are probably thinking payments are payments, what's all that about? So just kind of give us a kind of high level view as to what the nuances there are there.
Yeah, I mean, there's in really, really broad terms, sort of like the broadest categories you might think about is in the US, a lot of consumers pay for goods and services with their credit cards. There's other types of payments that we make all the time, right? You think about paying for bills, for utilities or something like that. You think about paying maybe your mortgage, or you might think about paying your insurance premiums, things of those lines. There's also payments that are occurring between businesses at all times. So you're paying suppliers, or your businesses are paying out their customers, or businesses might be receiving funds from their customers. So there's sort of like this payment activity that's happening around us all the time that we're maybe not even really aware of or thinking about. And this ecosystem around payments is constantly changing and evolving. Even though some of the payment networks have been around for a long time, there's just lots of modernization and innovation that happens around payments. And Dwolla is lucky enough that we often get to be at the center of a lot of payment innovation that's happening in the US.
Wow, yeah. Again, it's great to see these worlds within worlds. We never really kind of notice. They're there, but we don't really know what they're doing.
Yeah, like for example, one space in the US that's emerging is a space that we call pay by bank. And, here it's really, really common for, you go to the store, you got to buy something, pick up a coffee, you either scan, swipe, whatever, your credit card. But there's an emerging space where there are new tools and networks that have become available for folks in the US to pay with their bank accounts. And some of the consumer behavior around the way that people pay has also changed.
Wow.
The younger generations are less interested in building up massive debt around credit cards or around loans. And so they're thinking about ways to manage their finances better. And one way they can do that is to pay with their bank accounts. So the funds draft directly from the funds that they have available today, and they're not swiping a credit card and borrowing against something that they have to pay off at a high interest rate tomorrow. Businesses are at the same time constrained right now, right? And looking for ways to save money. And some of the ways that they receive payments from folks today are more expensive. And they're looking to things like account-to-account payments to have a more efficient way to receive funds. And so they're helping they're working with consumers to sort of source those funds from bank accounts and looking to save money by doing things that way. So there's like this there's sort of like this multiple things coming together, right? Consumers wanting to be more smart about the way that they manage their finances, and businesses being more wise about the way that they receive funds. Those things come together to
Yes.
sort of bring this pay by bank to the forefront of what's happening. And
Wow.
Dwolla is lucky enough to be able to offer technology in this space and be part of this journey.
And this sounds like a beautiful, complex arena. And as you say, it's kind of moving all the time. And you kind of mentioned it's adapting and changing. So how does a system like that actually adapt and upgrade or modify itself? Because everybody's kind of connected to this stuff. I'm in my head, I've got like these APIs and kind of like certain channels where things go in. And to update one of those, I mean, that must be like a feat in itself, because it's not like one or two payments happening here. It's like millions happening per second.
Yeah, when you think about the scale of account to account payments in the US, so there's a particular network that we have that's called the ACH network. That ACH network is primarily run by the banking ecosystem. And today, that ecosystem processes about $80 trillion in payments every year.
Wow.
And of that 80 trillion, about 50 trillion of the payments is business to business payments.
Wow.
So it's a massive scale.
Yeah.
Now, if you kind of rewind the clock, go back maybe 10 to 15 years, that ACH ecosystem was kind of a closed off ecosystem. The primary players who worked in it were mostly financial institutions, and they're sending money between each other. But companies like Dwolla have emerged to open up that ecosystem to other players and to innovators. And so ACH is a tried and true network. It functions and it's very powerful.
Yeah.
But what companies like fintech companies like Dwolla are doing is opening up that closed off ecosystem to other innovators. And we've been so amazed by some of the sort of amazing innovations that innovators build with our APIs and tools on top of that ACH platform.
I love this. It's a topic that's come up a few times with the various guests that we've had. And I want to speak to it again. So this is kind of democratizing an industry, which was there was a kind of clique there before, where people weren't really let in. So democratizing allows that ability for people with lots of different perspectives to suddenly come up with, as you mentioned there, innovations in that space.
Yeah, innovations in payments kind of happen all over the place. And maybe I can give like a real world example to help sort of for the minds of the listeners think about like how this could happen. So, one of the spaces in the US that's sort of like ripe for innovation is around the insurance industry. There's lots of existing legacy companies that have been around for decades and even longer. And these businesses, especially in today's market, are thinking about how can they innovate and how can they scale up and how can they modernize and digitally transform themselves. So one area in insurance that some of us are very familiar with is the claims area. You might, in your life, if you have insurance, have to file an insurance claim at some point. And lots of insurance companies have challenges around claims and claims processing. And there are now insurtech companies that are forming to try to help insurance carriers improve the way that they process claims. So let's imagine for a minute that we are software architects inside an insurtech company, and we're thinking about how to build an end-to-end solution to modernize claims payouts. And if we were drawing a conceptual architecture on the board, we would be talking about different areas of the business that we had to improve. We might talk about, okay, we need the capability to file a claim. We need the capability to assign an adjuster to a claim. We need a capability to process documents as part of a claim, to interface with other third parties to process and get data about claims. And sometimes when there's an insurance claim, there's a payout to the insured on the other side that's going to receive money to cover whatever loss that they have.
Right.
So payments would be one small chunk of a broader architecture that we're building to modernize insurance claims. And instead of building that small chunk ourselves as an insurtech company, we could look to a business like Dwolla to help us bring in a modern API and solution to process claims payments, to send money to those who have received claim payouts for whatever it might be.
Right.
And we could choose to process that on a bank payment rail that's efficient and it's safe and it can move money relatively quickly. In some cases, we can send funds instantly between bank accounts in the US.
Again, fascinating. This is a world that very few of us actually get to see. And we kind of shrug our shoulders and go, yeah, it can't be that hard. It's just somebody with an Excel sheet kind of making sure that ledgers are kind of balancing up, but it's a lot more than that. So my final question, Skyler, on your industry is that you kind of mentioned all these kind of payments running around, and there's some pretty serious ledgers, as you just explained. There's some pretty large amounts. How does that all get reconciled? Do you ever have bun fights? I don't know if bun fights is a term that you use in the US, but a bun fight is where people start throwing food at each other, where something doesn't quite line up, something doesn't match. My ledger says you owe me X amount, and your ledger says it doesn't. Does that ever happen in the industry?
I think in account-to-account payments, ledger technology is a very important and core part of the solutions that we offer. So Dwolla has developed behind the scenes with our API a very sophisticated ledger that is tracking the money movement that's happening between financial institutions, between what we call end users on our platform, who might be consumers or they might be businesses who are exchanging funds with one another. And we're tracking all that information at a very, very deep and detailed level. Early in the days in the company, this was actually one of the hard engineering problems that we had to solve together, was to figure out how to build this sophisticated ledger, what architecture patterns to use, and things of that nature. So yeah, that can be an issue, right? Where one's ledger doesn't necessarily match with another's ledger. This is an area where a solution like Dwolla can be really useful, especially at an engineering level, because we offer on top of our APIs other tools that help to manage and reconcile payments as they've occurred. So like one example is we allow a business to attach what we call a correlation ID to a payment. So imagine that, in our business, we have an order that's processing. We have an order ID attached to that. We then issue a payment to collect funds for that order. Our system allows a business to tie together the payment with the order ID. And so then if you're looking up the payment details, you can refer to either the payment ID or you can refer to the order ID, right? And it's all sort of tied together in the ledger. So the ledger reconciliation, knowing where the funds are, how they've moved through the system, what happened when, and exact moments of time, it can all become really important in processing payments. And that's, again, a big architecture challenge that we had to solve here.
So what I'd like to do now is take the spotlight away from the company and over to you, your leadership and who you are. What's your journey been like to tech leadership to the position that you're in now?
So I started my career in software about 20 years ago. Funny enough, I used an example earlier of insurance. I actually worked at an insurance company, and I was building software to process what we would call quotes for insurance claims. During that time, early in my career, I was just really fascinated by solving problems with software. I loved studying architecture patterns. I loved thinking about designing systems to solve problems. I loved finding optimizations in systems. And I loved working with my teammates to solve big challenges. When I was working inside of an enterprise, one of the things that I often felt myself challenged by was I sort of have this internal drive to continue to get better every day and to improve and to learn new things. And I sometimes would run across folks who maybe didn't have that exact same drive, right? Who maybe they were a little bit complacent or stagnant in their role. And I started to realize how important it is for me to be part of an organization where those around me are constantly being driven to grow and improve every day. And that sort of impact of like the team that I'm on and how that team works, that has a huge impact on how my life feels and how I approach my day and what gets me excited to go to a place every day. I
Yeah.
love to learn. I love to keep expanding my horizons and growing. And so, about 5 years into working in the enterprise world, I decided to do something that was kind of crazy or felt crazy to me at the time. And I decided to see what it would be like to work at a startup company. And so I started thinking about, okay, if I want to join a startup company, what kind of business would I want to work for? What do I have software expertise in? And I'm located in the Midwest in the US. And so I was thinking even, man, I'm gonna have to think about moving my family to either the East or the West Coast in order to work for a startup. And as I was doing my research and learning about, these companies and how they worked and what it would be like to work at one, I ended up finding this company that was right in my backyard called Dwolla. And the founder was founding the business in Des Moines, Iowa, where I live. And it was becoming, nationally well known for the sort of innovative ideas that the founder had, the space and payments that they were working, that was sort of like an untapped area that was ripe for innovation, but no one had really started working on it yet. And so it was just a completely unique opportunity for me that happened to be the kind of role that I wanted in the kind of place that I wanted to be.
Mm.
And things just sort of kind of magically worked out that way. And so I decided to make the leap and leave an enterprise world and take a huge risk in my life and join a startup company called Dwolla. And that was 12 years ago.
Wow.
And when I say that now that I've been working for a startup company for the last 12 years, people look at me like I'm crazy sometimes.
It's quite unusual, but it's really good.
Yeah,
I can tell that you love what you've created and you've been part of that journey of growth.
yeah. So I joined Dwolla as a software engineer. And as I've mentioned, we had lots of interesting and challenging problems to solve in software. And what I found myself being gravitated toward was taking leadership in the company around those difficult problems that we had to solve. I would spend time, researching how others were solving that problem. I would spend time researching designs and architecture patterns for those problems. I would spend time documenting it, communicating it with the rest of the team. And I started to build these skills that I didn't necessarily know at the time were solid leadership skills,
Mm.
right? And the right kinds of things that you need to be a leader in a business. And as I kept developing these, the sort of team just sort of kind of naturally gravitated toward looking to me to work with the rest of the business and lead them. And
Right.
that led to multiple series of promotions and new opportunities to the point where I find myself now, where I'm the CTO of the company.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So I think there's a lot of inspiration in there, and I think there's a lot of takeaways for our aspiring tech leaders out there. That maybe how they set up their journey and dance towards where they want to get to. But we'll cover that later on in the podcast as well. There's a question I asked later on. So what's the real passion you have in the work that you do? I mean, I can see that you're really passionate about this, and it's a good job actually, because people need to have a passion around payments and what have you. What is your passion? What's the thing that makes you jump out of bed in the morning to get to work?
At Dwolla, it's my passion is around the team and the people. It started with the company, as I mentioned, started as a passion around solving complex issues for our customers and for our business, right? Like walking around, almost like walking around the floor of the business and looking for these like really, really challenging problems that no one else was willing to work on or to pick up. Or maybe things that like in another business or another organization, you might think of as like once of a career type of opportunities. In a small company and a startup, those once in a career opportunities are laying all over the floor, and it's
Right.
possible to pick them up and learn from them. And so my initial passions in the business were around those problems. When I was getting so much value and learning so much from the company, I started feeling passionate about helping others have that same experience. And as I started stepping into leadership, I started to feel excitement around making sure that the opportunities I had growing up in the company and learning in the business and the great tremendous value and joy that it brought to me to be part of Dwolla, I wanted to instill and keep that culture as part of the business as the business continued to grow and continued to scale. I wanted to help protect that culture. so that others could have the same opportunity that I had. And
Yes.
so now I would say that's the thing that motivates me at Dwolla is being able to give challenging problems to our product folks or to our engineering folks and see them really sit down and wrestle with those things, try
Mm.
to break them apart and tease out the small solutions that can solve the bigger problems over time, and to see them succeed in that and to
Nice.
bring that value to the business and to see like the way that that can change their careers and the way that that can change their lives.
Yeah.
That's what motivates me now.
Yeah, it sounds like a very enabling form of leadership. And we've had some conversations offline around, the concept of leadership, how important it is. So, I'd love to dig a little bit deeper down into that learning that you've developed over your journey and what's worked for you and what hasn't.
So, as a leader, what works for me is to be curious, to try to be constantly learning, and try to be in a position where I'm asking good questions.
Good
I think a
questions.
lot about asking good questions.
Yeah.
And there's a handful, like 5 or so questions that I find myself coming back to over and over as a leader that I found can be really helpful in getting people to think outside the box that they're currently in and challenge their thinking, or to help resolve an issue when folks get stuck.
Right.
One of those questions that I come back to a lot of times is, what problem are we trying to solve?
Mm.
We've all maybe had the experience of like being in a meeting and or being in a discussion and things kind of feel like they're rolling in circles, or like we keep uncovering different areas of a problem and go down a rabbit hole to try to solve that problem. But that question, what problem are we trying to solve, oftentimes helps bring people back to the same page, right? If we could put it in one sentence or 2 sentences, what will we write down and say, this is the thing that we're all here to do. This is the outcome that we're hoping for. This is the problem that we're trying to solve right now.
Yes.
And trying to bring that focus to a conversation. That's a question that I find myself asking a lot of times.
That's a very good one. And from my own journey, I think that alignment, going back to what we're trying to solve, it's interesting. It's as human beings, we tend to kind of drift off. We're going to use the analogy of kittens. We tend to kind of wander off in lots of different directions. We need to kind of herd ourselves back into that one thing that we're working on, because otherwise we just kind of get lost. And I guess this is the kind of role as leaders, is to align us back to what is that thing? What is that thing that we should be gravitating around?
And even inside of that, another question that I find myself asking a lot to teams is, even within the problem we're trying to solve, what are we trying to optimize for in our solution as a framework for how we approach decisions that we make? So sometimes we might be optimizing for speed to solving whatever problem we're working on. Other times we might be optimizing for the cost of the solution that we have to deliver. In another case, we might be optimizing for the resiliency over time of that solution. So being clear not only on what do we want to solve, but what do we optimize for inside of that solution, it helps create a nice framework for a team to like put them in a box or create some boundaries
Yes.
around work.
Good. And I've got a question around, once you know what you're optimizing for, from my experience with teams, is that sometimes they game that one thing that you're trying to optimize at the sacrifice of other things. And I'm interested in how you manage to make sure that doesn't happen, because, if you say you're going to optimize on speed and then they'll start taking out features. And
so when you're choosing what you optimize for, leads to another question that I often challenge teams with or ask is, what's the smallest step we can take?
Yeah.
Because if you define a problem, especially if it's a very large problem, and optimize on, let's say, speed, but try to take a really big step really fast, you can't get feedback.
Yeah.
So you don't know, was that step successful? Did we achieve what we were hoping to get? You have to find a way to take a small step. You have to take a problem, break it down into a chunk where you can deliver that fast, but then realize what maybe you missed when you were optimizing. So maybe you thought you should be optimizing for speed. You go really fast and realize, oh no, that was the wrong thing to optimize for.
Nice.
That's why it's key, think about being agile software. That's why it's key to work on those small steps.
Yeah. I think that's a great takeaway, actually. I think, Skyler, you touched on something there where we often, especially, is it especially engineers? I think just people in general, we want to take those big leaps and we want to bound to the kind of next kind of like level, whatever it is. And pointing it back to the magic or the wisdom of agile is to make those steps small so we have those tight feedback loops. I think that's a really good takeaway. I'm hoping that tech leaders out there listening to this are kind of going, yeah, I get that, because I see the value in doing that.
For the leaders, I guess like I acknowledge the challenge of being able to both simultaneously take small steps and have a big vision for where you want to go.
Yeah.
That's, I think, one of the like really, really difficult challenges of being a tech leader is holding both of those things,
Yeah.
trying to hold both those things in your head, right? Trying to hold a strategic direction or a strategic vision of what you want to achieve or where you want to go. But then also having an idea of the small steps that are being made toward that vision that are ultimately maybe adjusting slightly what the strategic vision is.
Yes. Yeah. The paradox. I think the most interesting parts of life and the most where we have the most growth and the innovations are where we have those paradoxes, and that's a paradox, isn't it? It's how do we have a yes and on that? I'm interested. Are there any other questions that you ask in your leadership? You kind of mentioned 5.
There's 2 more. The next one is kind of the small step one, but a little bit different. One of the things I often want to introduce is this, leaders might think of it as this idea of urgency in your teams, right? Moving quickly and thinking about taking urgent action toward things. One of the ways I like to describe that is thinking about how could we deliver value today instead of delivering value tomorrow, and thinking about the throughput of our work. So setting up our teams and our systems and our plans such that we're thinking about when we take a small step, that small step should get all the way through our processes and procedures into an actual end user's hands, right? It's interesting. Sometimes when we take small steps, we think about as technologists like small change to a system here, small change to a system there, small improvement in this certain area. And then maybe those changes sit on the shelf or don't get to a consumer fast enough or don't help solve a problem. We want to try to find the small steps to take toward a problem that can be pushed all the way through to whoever we're trying to solve the problem for. And so I think a lot about how we could increase our throughput. And when I say throughput, it's not about necessarily speed of delivery. It's about speed of getting something from it's a line of code that's being tested and developed on the engineer's laptop all the way to it's in our production system and available to provide value.
Love it.
And then the last one is sort of overarching all of this stuff. In your company, in your business, you often have people who move around. They switch teams. They take on new roles. Sometimes they grow within the business. Sometimes they end up growing outside of your business. And so there's this constant need to share knowledge. And if you're not careful, a lot of the knowledge about your software, about your systems, about your products and your technology can become tribal knowledge. And so a question that I asked to try to challenge against that is, where is this written down? Have we written this down somewhere? Because teams, when they start moving fast, they start taking a big problem, breaking it down into chunks, talking about what they want to optimize for, getting their ideas, then they just want to go and do it. And a lot of times it's really important to pause, write that thing down, document the problem that you're trying to solve, document what you were trying to optimize for, document the small steps that you want to take, and then go and make the change. And sometimes I think that feels like a waste of time, but I can tell you the number of times we either exposed that there was a smaller step or a different step we could take that was better than the one we were planning by writing it down. That's happened a ton of times. Or the number of times that we've come back and revisited those plans and could point out, this is why we did the thing that we did. This is what we were trying to optimize for. These were the decisions that we made and all the things that influenced us. It helps us be better the next time we have to make a decision, the next time we have to think about something, right? So we come back to those resources and review our plans and our decisions pretty frequently.
That's right. As you were describing that, the concept of metacognition came up, where we're thinking about our thinking. And I think the act of writing stuff down actually forces us to do that, because we're thinking about what we thought. And obviously we can return back to it and go, and this is what our thinking was at the time. And to kind of clarify, in my career as a software engineer, I can recall times where, why did we make this decision? And we had it written down. We would have gone, yeah, that's excellent. But we end up repeating the same mistake again. We go back to what we were doing before. And actually, there was a good reason why we did make the change. So I'm with you on that one. And I think one of the other things that came up is that one of the agile values speaks to, delivering value to our customers over comprehensive documentation. And I think a lot of techies, they tend to read that and go, oh, we don't do any documentation. And you think, no, that's not what it's saying. It's over one or the other. So I hear the challenge.
There's been a number of times where someone described it to me this way. Two people are talking about a problem and they're developing a picture of that problem in their brain. When one person takes the picture in their brain and puts it on paper, either in words or in a diagram, then the other person can say, oh no, that's not the same picture I was drawing in my brain. Mine was totally different. Yeah. Here's the things I was thinking about, and it exposes those challenges. Yeah. The more you can get folks to think about it that way, take the things out of their brain and get it onto paper, then there's been a number of times, right, where we take that thing on paper and it exposes some flaw in our thinking.
Yes.
And when we expose that flaw in our thinking, we end up with a better end solution.
Absolutely. And this is a missed trick. And I think with the advent of working remotely, I'm going to go into a bit of a rant, because I think one of the things that we've kind of lost in our going remotely is that we've lost these things called the whiteboards or the blackboards, if we're really going to go back a few years. And that they were a great opportunity to reflect what our thinking process was. And I know we've got collaboration tools that we can use kind of remotely, but it's not quite the same. And I think we need to kind of get back to that to be able to communicate what my thinking is. And again, coming back to the concept of metacognition, is that look at my thinking. This is my thinking. And then you can critique that thinking or align with that thinking or go, oh, that's got me thinking in a completely different way. So do you have challenges with that working remotely, or is that something that you've kind of worked out quite well?
When I think about remote work, it has trade-offs. And for sure, one of the trade-offs is we can't just take a timeout and all gather around a whiteboard and draw what we see or what we were thinking. And then someone else grabs the marker or the eraser and erases parts of it and draws their part, adds their thing with the marker. It's not as easy to do that. I kind of agree. I don't think the collaboration tools have necessarily met that need yet. So with remote work, one of the trade-offs that we're making is in exchange to get the flexibility of working from home and maybe an improved work-life balance, or to be able to work with the best people from all over the world on a problem, we have to exchange for not being in the same room together.
Yes.
And in order to make that exchange, there's a cost. And that cost is we have to figure out how to become better writers, how to become better drawers, and we have to spend a little bit more time putting our plans on paper in digital form, which is more difficult than drawing it on a whiteboard and sharing it in real time. That's a trade-off.
Yes, that's right. So I'm looking forward to it. If there's anyone listening out there that's going to create that virtual whiteboard in a really whiteboardy sense, kind of thing, it kind of really works like it used to. Because I remember those times we used to fight over the pen. No, I want to say my bit, and there was this real kind of energy. I remember one team, I got a whiteboard for every one of the teams. They had like an A1 size next to each of their desks. And it creates this beautiful kind of gravity pull where people will congregate around it and share ideas and stuff. So I'm looking forward to those days. I'm sure we'll figure it out because we're ingenious creatures. But the point you made there is very valid. So this is great, Skyler. I love this. Loads of wisdom. I've got some beautiful takeaways from that as well. So give us a reminder of those questions that you'll ask, because I think they're gems.
So let's start with the very beginning. The first question is, what problem are we trying to solve? And this is to try to bring everyone into alignment to why we are here and what we're trying to do. The next question is, inside of that problem, what are we optimizing for? What are the most important things that we need to consider when we solve this problem? The next question is, what's the smallest step that we could take to improve? Followed quickly by, how can we deliver that value today instead of delivering that value to tomorrow? How can we have strong throughput to get that value? And then the last one is, where have we written this down?
Nice. Love it. I love it. Great questions. Hopefully our audience have got some great ideas and thoughts and got them provoked their thinking around this. I love questions because there's a saying, the answer is in the question, and I think questions are very powerful, especially as leaders, because it gets people thinking in their own space as opposed to being told what to do. Okay, so brilliant. I love that. We've kind of spoken around how you get the best out of your teams, through these questions and ideas and what have you. I just want to take it to another slightly higher level than that and look at it from leading a tech department and how you actually create your teams and how they work. And obviously the way the world has changed. We've mentioned around working remotely and people being not in the same room together. Any wisdom that you'd like to kind of share around as a how as a tech leader you kind of operate in that space?
In my view, the business around running a technology company has changed pretty dramatically in the last few years. Where in the past we were thinking about hyperscaling. That's not really a common thing in today's world, and it's not really an area of focus for most tech leaders. Today, the area of focus is more around sustainable and responsible growth for your business and for your team. So my background is in engineering. It's really similar to yours. And I think about some of the things that I've tried to do in my career. And I would say that, speaking with very, very broad strokes, that engineers have a tendency to think that they could probably solve any problem, which is probably true most of the time. But sometimes we have to ask ourselves the question, is this a problem that we should solve? Is this the right thing for us to be working on? Is this the right thing that we should be doing, right? We can go and write our own software for managing software tickets. We can easily go purchase Jira to do that, right? Of course, we could build our own. We're smart, we could figure it out. But is that really the best use or the right use of our time? That's a pretty contrived example, but it's one example. So at Dwolla, this sort of drove us to start thinking about a question. And the question started off like this. When we think about all the technology and all the products and all the services that we have, would we consider those things core technology, or would we consider those things non-core technology? The phrases weren't quite right at the beginning. I'll talk about how we got to the evolution of what they became, but we started with this concept. Is it core or is it non-core? And we actually drew like a Venn diagram. And we had one side core and one side non-core. We looked at all the services and all the technology that we offered, and we put it into one of those buckets. And if it was kind of in the middle, we called it like an overlap, right? Where the Venn diagram sits in between. But what we were thinking about for core is we were trying to consider like, what are the areas of our systems and of our technology and of our products that are, maybe we could call it secret sauce to Dwolla. Only we know how to build this or how to maintain or manage or create this thing.
Yes.
Those are the things that we think of as core. And so it naturally sort of evolved that, okay, if I have 4 hours to spend on something today, does it make sense for me to invest in something that is core technology or non-core technology? And the answer was, well, of course, it makes sense to invest in something that would be a core technology, right? That would add to the special secret sauce that only Dwolla can build.
Yes.
And that was a useful framework for us to think about how we pick which solutions of our technology stack to work on, to develop, which products to build, and which things that we might want to work with others to build. So ultimately, one of the challenges we came up with this terminology of core and non-core is that there were some things that were non-core. And sometimes people in our business were working on things that we would call non-core. And they were like, it's kind of hard. It kind of sucks for me to like walk in the office and work on a non-core thing every day, because I should probably be working on a core thing, right, Skyler? So we ended up evolving that terminology a little bit. The more we talked about it and the more we thought about it. And we ended up renaming these things. So back to the Venn diagram, we kept the term core technology, but we started calling the non-core stuff we started referring to that as SaaS technology, right? Solutions that we might want to buy or purchase. And then we talked about the things that fell in the middle as integrating systems. And we basically said, hey, as a team, we think we should be focusing on our time on core solutions or integrating solutions to SaaS solutions, right? We don't think we should be building things that we could go and purchase as a SaaS solution. And so it became sort of like a clean way for us to talk about the systems that we were building and we were working on and make sure that we're focusing in the right areas. And it also helped us think about where are the areas of the business that we should be asking for help. So if we know there's a SaaS solution available and we know someone that has experience integrating with a SaaS solution, that's a perfect opportunity for us to responsibly grow our business and get some help to build those things without adding headcount or a lot of people to our existing team. And so that's a way that we have adapted into this sort of new environment where it's not about hyperscale. It's not about adding, hundreds of engineers to your team every year. It's being responsible with your growth and your spend as a business. And this sort of core SaaS and integration framework has given us a nice way to look at those problems and decide which techniques to deploy in which areas.
I love that. I think that's very wise. I love this intentional reflection as to what we're doing, what are we working on, and what can we. In fact, as you mentioned that, one of the conversations with another leader came up, which was that he was really surprised at how many companies end up creating a CRM system in-house. And you're thinking, they're already out there, kind of thing. You don't need to reinvent that wheel out there. I mean, that's a completely different type of example, but it's an example of doing something that's not in our core competence. So yeah, I love that. I love that. So the question I have around that is how you bring in these SaaS? Because obviously you've got to be able to trust these companies are going to be there forever and a day because you're kind of investing in their product being available, what have you. What's your kind of strategy around bringing these things into your kind of family of tools or your infrastructure, your solution?
So when we talked about the 5 questions, one of the things we talked about is what problem we're trying to solve and then what we're optimizing for, right? So what I've found is that, those sort of beginner questions, as you're exploring a problem space, often lead to, is this something that we could go and buy a solution to help us with? A lot of people use the phrase, would we build this? Would we buy this? Or would we partner on this? And so often it maybe happens a bit more upstream from the software engineering and more in the product management sort of realm, where we're doing product discovery on a potential solution or new build or offering that we want to bring to our customers. And one of those questions is, do we think we should build this ourselves? Do we think we should buy this, or do we think we should partner to deliver this?
Yeah, good, excellent. So Skyler, I'm loving this. This is great stuff. But I have a question that's been niggling away at the back of my mind and a conversation that we had a long time ago. And this is around mental models. And I would love for you to bring that topic into the space. Speak about that, please.
I'm constantly trying to learn and become better as a leader. And so I look to resources outside of my existing knowledge base to try to become smarter and try to think about things differently. And one of the things that I found myself like pulled to and attracted to was this podcast called The Knowledge Project. And the person who leads that podcast his name is Shane Parrish. And he has several books that he's written. It's a number of volumes, and they're called The Great Mental Models. And so I started reading these books and became fascinated with them, basically around this kind of idea of seeing the world through the eyes of others and with new perspectives. And there's these mental models that I keep finding myself being pulled back to as I try to lead in the business and try to think about my role as a leader and try to just sometimes break out of a box and think differently. So one of the mental models is, and I'll just give a few different examples to help the listeners. And I really encourage you to check out the books. So the first one is the mental model is that the map is not the territory. So oftentimes as a leader, you might find yourself in a position where you're looking at a map. You're looking at a map of a place that you want to go, but the map isn't the territory. If you were actually able to transport yourself and be on the territory, not just looking at the map, you might see that it's not flat. It has mountains. It has trees that we have to work around. It has maybe lakes that we have to work through, and things that the depths and the peaks and the valleys and the challenges, the undulations of the territory, you can't see that on the map.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes helpful to just break out of your current thinking and remember that what you're seeing may not be the actual reality of being there. And sometimes you need to just take a moment and go and be part of the territory. Another mental model that I think about a lot is second order thinking. Second order thinking is, others are probably very familiar with it, but it's very helpful for me because if you're thinking about as a leader, like a decision or something you want to do or a move that you want to make, you sometimes think about that first move and what that will cause, what change that might have. But you often don't pause and think about, you make a move, make a change, that causes something to happen. And then that ripple causes second order effects. And sometimes it's very helpful to think through, what are those second order effects that could be caused by this change that I make right now? Because if you're able to predict them, sometimes the second order effects you can't predict. But if you could predict a second order effect, if you thought it through, you might realize that the current thing you're doing may need to be molded or changed or rethought through slightly to avoid or to get the right second order effects that you want.
What came up for me as you described that is that something might emerge that we don't know what's going to appear. Okay, so there's going to be, we know it's going to have an effect. I mean, I use this a lot in my kind of leadership when I'm coaching leaders, is that I don't know what I'm sharing or the way we're working is going to have an effect, but I know it's going to have an effect of some sort. There's going to be some emergent behavior or emergent kind of new understanding. How do you kind of handle that? I mean, is it something that you set yourself up for, or is it something that you speak about in the space with your kind of teams?
One of the things that we've done is try to keep a record of the decisions that we make. And oftentimes we try to write down like what we think, or at least as best we can at the time, like what the second order effects would be. So coming back to that power of writing things down, we can go back and refer to those decisions and why we made them. And maybe there are second order effects that we didn't expect or didn't anticipate because of this. So it's pretty easy to reopen that documentation that we have and write down, okay, just a note for future readers.
Yes.
Later, we also learned that this thing could happen if we do that. And that's probably not the best case. So if we were to make this decision again or to have this problem in the future, we'd take a different approach now because we've learned some other potential effects of this approach.
Yeah, I love it. I love the power of writing this down. It kind of reminds me of my journaling. I'm an avid journaler, and which allows you to kind of go back and kind of chew on what the hell was I thinking then. Excellent. So as we come to our closing arc of our time together, unfortunately, Skyler, I've had loads of key takeaways, but I just want to close off with some nice warm questions. So I want to ask you, are there any other books that you'd like to offer our tech leader audience out there that you think were instrumental in your journey that it'd be good for them to kind of chew on?
One book that was really great was called The Tech Executive Operating System. I don't know if that's been mentioned already on your podcast or not. The author's name is Aviv Ben Youssef. I found it to be an excellent book, especially if you're a little bit early in your role as a tech executive. And one area that was really valuable for me was that he does an excellent job of sort of giving you a framework. I believe he calls it the LEAP framework. And it's basically supposed to tell you what are the 4 areas where you as a leader should be spending your time. And so LEAP stands for leadership, evangelism, architecture, and people. So as a tech leader, the LEAP framework, and he presents in great detail, the different areas you should be thinking about and new mental models to consider. And I found it to be an excellent book.
Excellent. I think that's a great shout. I've not heard of it before. I think this is a really interesting one. So yeah, audience out there, start ordering that and having a read. So Skyler, here we go. I'm going to offer you a wish. Okay. It's a fun part of the podcast. I'm going to be the tech genie for a second. I'm going to offer you a wish for your leadership, for your industry in the tech space. What would you wish for from the tech genie?
I think with the advent of artificial intelligence, we chatted a little bit earlier about this notion of having a second brain. It would be wonderful to wave a magic wand and create a safe and responsible second brain that could help capture everything that's going on
Yeah.
in your world as a tech leader and could help you sort of remember the things that you need to follow up on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Remember the areas where you want to guide teams. Sometimes I think about my job as like maybe the beginning part of an assembly line and helping to put new and exciting and fun and challenging things on assembly lines for teams.
Yes.
And I'm often managing many things in parallel.
Yeah.
So, probably getting closer to reality than a wish, but
Mm.
have sort of that virtual assistant who could really hear what's going on and analyze it really well and give you lots of feedback and ideas, remind you of the things that you're trying to move forward.
I am 100% with you. In fact, I'm going to make that wish come true because it's what I want too. Okay, it's really interesting that you brought this up because I think with the advent of AI, and as you say, we're not far from it. It's kind of happening already. For example, recording meetings and getting the AI to do a summary of the meeting and then being able to ask questions about it as well. And I think it'll take the pressure off a lot of us as well. We don't need to try so hard to remember everything. It's kind of remembered for us. And it brings me to a funny comment I had with a set of tech leaders a couple of weeks ago. We were just getting together and just chewing on stuff. And somebody referred to AI or Chat GPT, if we want to refer to the one that many of us are using, as a highly opinionated intern. Give them some information and see what they think. What should I do with this? What's the key takeaways? How should I write this email? And they kind of give this opinion and it kind of gives you something to start with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hope that one day that intern will be promoted into a new role and have a bit more context in MBA. Right now, sometimes AI feels like a very eager intern in our business. We're going to take on any role with unlimited energy. Maybe needs a little bit more direction from time to time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I'm also a big fan of co-leading. Just to share with the audience, I use ChatGPT as a sounding board. I put stuff in and this is what I'm thinking, writing, what do you think? So it allows me to have a conversation with somebody without bothering anybody. I can obviously take it to a real person. So I'm going to make that wish come true for you. We all need it, especially in this world where we're being bombarded with information and stuff all the time. So that's great.
And I thought of a second wish. I'm going to make two wishes.
Go for it then.
Since you're so close to solving that one, I'm going to make another one. I think about the space that Dwolla works in, and goodness, my wish would be that we could think of ways to dramatically level up I'll call it the interoperability between financial institutions and payment systems across the world. There are so many silos and independent areas and independent protocols and thinking around payments in the US alone, but if you bring in the world, right, and think of all the payment systems that exist, it's just so difficult and challenging to interoperate between them. So mechanisms and APIs and processes and protocols that everyone would quickly adopt and agree to make that a lot simpler, because like we've talked about at the beginning, there's payments are just such a big part of what we do, and the less and less we have to think about them, I think the better and better all of our lives are going to be.
Totally agree. Excellent. Great point there. And I'm going to work on that wish for you as well. Okay. Just remember, if it comes true, it was kind of happening here.
Right.
So as we come to the final full stop of the podcast, Skyler, what's your final key takeaway that you'd like to gift our tech leader audience listening to this podcast right now?
Obviously, the world that we live in as tech leaders is a difficult and a challenging one. We have tough roles and big responsibilities in our businesses and the organizations that we lead. I know that many of the folks on this call probably take like a lot of the weight of their organization and of their teams on their shoulders. And I just think I'd take this moment to tell you all that wherever you're doing, if you're listening to this right now, you're likely making an investment in yourself to become better for you and for your teams. And I think that's great and super positive. And I think it's fantastic that you listening choose to get up every day and go and be a leader in tech and to try to help people, try to help your organization move forward and to try to solve all problems and keep doing what you're doing and keep challenging yourself. And I believe you'll be very successful.
Brilliant. What a wonderful and positive note to finish on. Thank you for your time, Skyler. It's been wonderful having you on CTO Confessions.
Thank you so much. It's a great time. I really enjoyed being here.
And finally, remember to subscribe to CTO Confessions podcast and IT Labs newsletter, where you get regular tech articles and invites to the IT Labs webinar series. URLs for this can be found at the bottom of this page. We are consistently creating material to create, nurture and support a community of tech leaders. And of course, if you want to know more about IT Labs services, including our Teams as a Service service, please don't hesitate to get in touch. As mentioned in the intro, please think of us like tech leaders' favourite off-the-shelf service, providing agility, high-performing teams off that shelf with a wide breadth of skill and knowledge. Well, that's all, folks. Look after each other and keep safe. Wishing you all a good day or evening wherever you are in the world from all of us here at IT Labs. Live long, live well.